Right. So the Pathfinder Bestiary 3. This is a rather interesting picture we have here of a mechanical dragon, and
so we're looking at that's the cover of the book is what
cover
we're
of
looking
the
at with
book.
that. So we've got a bunch of skeletons, we've got a clockwork dragon, and we've got some tooth fairies. The tooth fairies, I'd say, not natural friends of a horde of skeletons. They're going to do very well out of it. I don't think the skeletons are going to be too happy by the end of it.
Although, well, I tell you what, though, they probably don't care because I've never fought a skeleton with a bite attack.
That is true,
They
actually.
never bother with biting because I guess you haven't got the sort of muscles to make it a particular. It'd be like being bitten by an extremely old person, like just be like. So why would you bother? So you've got the skeletons here, and I did notice the tooth fairy straight away because I mean there's made no bones of that. That's they clearly like the tooth fairies. What the 4 tooth fairies are doing in what is clearly a major raid / battle of an undead army? Who knows? Who knows?
We're going to talk about the tooth fairies. Don't worry. I've put them on the list of things to actually talk about because they're gross and frightening, and they make me not want to sleep at night. So I thought we should add them in. But they are fun. But so yes, this is the Bestiary 3. The third instalment of it, and the last instalment, if you believe what Paizo have been saying, of the traditional Bestiary format. They said after this one, they're going to stop just sort of putting out just a book of monsters, and the monsters will come out in different ways, probably similar to what we've been seeing with the Lost Omens line, where you get lore and rules and bits and bobs all kind of blended together a bit more. So I think they're going for that kind of vibe in the future, rather than just like, here's a bunch of monsters, here's a bunch of monsters.
I think that's quite nice, and as well, if you're setting a campaign, I suppose you should pay attention to where monsters are supposed to be, rather than just throwing them willy nilly all around your adventures. So yeah.
They're nice. Bestiaries are always nice. They're nice to flick through as a GM. If you're padding out an adventure, or if you're building an adventure and you want something that's the right level to go in a particular slot, Bestiaries are really nice because you can flick through it until you find a bit of art that appeals to you, or you can look up by level, find something that's the right level, and be like, yep, I would like them to fight that. And certainly if you're homebrewing a dungeon, it is one of the little joys of DMing is to go through and just populate your dungeon with monsters that you like the look of, and find a way that they fit. That's great fun. But they are very functional, so they're quite hard to review. It's like reviewing a zoo, because you either like all the animals that are in it or you don't. So it's not kind of necessarily something you can really go into the same depth with like you would with a Lost Omens book. But hopefully we can give an idea of sort of what this one,
I think,
how this fits.
Yes. As I explained, this is effectively, Dan's cherry picking of some interesting stuff that you might find. Now, just to give us a context of how much we're not doing, how big is this book?
There are over 300 monsters in this book.
Okay, so we are barely scratching the surface of what is in that book. So just bear that in mind when you're listening and watching this review. There's lots more besides this. But
we're going to talk about some of the most interesting ones that I think really jump out from it. But fear not, we're not going to do what we did with the Ancestry Guide and try and review every single
Good. I was very generous with you, Dan, and let you do that. So we scan down, and the first thing we've come to is a cavalry brigade.
Yes. Okay.
Now this is interesting because you normally get singular monsters, not a regiment. I guess a brigade. So I'm presuming this is for your large scale encounters.
Yes, this is the big, I would say, the main mechanic that comes with this book, and probably the main reason for getting this book. And this is called the troop rule, or the troop mechanic. Troops are, if you think of them as massive swarms, you're not far off. So a troop is a regiment of troops, and the idea is it's a way of representing weaker monsters without needing loads of individuals, which can get into a weird thing from a balance point of view.
Yeah.
If you want your players to fight 90 zombies, that's a really cool idea. That's that's a zombie movie. That you want the group running out and just battering zombies and taking them all out. The problem is if you have 90 individual zombies, or partly that's a real pain to roll initiative for all of them.
God, yeah.
How on earth do you do that? But also, if you have 90 characters all rolling attacks, by sheer probability, a bunch of them are going to crit.
Yeah.
1/20th of them will crit. I hope I got that probability right. I'm not great with numbers, but I think 1 in 20. So that is, and they will just kill the players because they are making so many attacks that they will score enough crits to just bring the players down. So there has to be a better way of doing it, and this is a way of trying to do this. So troops let you represent all sorts of different things, and you've got a range of them in here. The cavalry brigade is one of them, so that's what we're seeing there. It's a bunch of hell knights up on horseback. But they've also got things like they've got a zombie horde. They've got the city watch, which is really nice.
That's good.
Yeah,
they come into stuff a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And it means if the watch gets called on you, there you go. You got a stat block for the watch that you can fight. To give you a bit of an overview of how they work, so they start off as taking up multiple squares, so about 16 by 60, 16 squares, not 16 by 16 squares. That'd be enormous. So 4 by 4 of units. They take up all of that. They take up all that space, and then as they take damage, so as you start attacking this huge unit of things, they go through certain thresholds, and as you go through different hit point thresholds, so you go down to get to sort of 60 hit points, then you take away a couple of the squares. You get to 40 hit points, you take away a couple more. You get down to 0 hit points, the last few disperse and run off into the distance, and that's the unit destroyed. So you kind of that's how that works, and in its own turn, it can do things to control its stuff. So it gets troops have a mechanic called form up. They've got an action called form up, where they basically move. You pick one square, and then you rearrange all the other squares of the unit around that to represent it moving and changing, so they can change their line and things like that. The way their attacks work is that they have an attack action. They usually have a couple of options based on how many actions to spend, and all it does is it deals damage to every enemy that is is within reach of the troop, and you get a basic reflex save against it, so you might be able to dodge the attack, but generally if you're toe to toe with it, you're just going to be taking damage while you're there. And that's a really really neat way of doing it in terms of stuff. If you're attacking them, you just deal damage. You take it off their hit points. That represents you taking out enemies. If you're casting spells at it, damaging spells are fine. Area spells do extra damage because that hits more people in the troop. Non-damaging spells generally don't do anything, like a fear spell. But if you can heighten it to the point that it would cover 4 squares worth of it, then you can basically make sections of the troop run away and diminish it. Basically they end up doing hit point damage to get it around. So that's how they work, and they've got sort of fun things like the knights can charge. Some of them have crossbows that they can load, and they can all do it. And they just do a volley of crossbow bolts on an area. It reminds me of the movie Hero with the Japanese movie with all the massive swarms of arrows coming down. That was great.
Yes.
Fun.
Okay, so first of all, like watching this, thoughts come to my mind because Paul made the comment, Warhammer now, is it? And it gave me the idea, like in your campaign, could you attach yourself to such a unit so you could effectively have your 6-person party or like 4-person party, each attached and leading their own regiment of Hell Knights or whatever, and then you could take your turns having that doing damage as well against opposing swarms of said goblins or zombies or whatever?
As a quick and dirty way of doing a battle with mass combat, yes, you could do that. I would suspect you would need to do it I would suspect it would become unfulfilling relatively quickly if you tried to just do it as mass combat, because it's not Warhammer. It doesn't have kind of the intricacies of that. But as a sort of a sequence that maybe you play out a section of the battle as controlling your troops and things like that, and then you zoom into the heroes and you go and play another thing. But It also means you can do the Dynasty Warriors thing. That's the kind of the big joy of this, is that a level 10 dwarf can take on a whole regiment of troops without a problem, and can just be smashing your way through it. Like the zombie horde is relatively low level. It's like level 6, I think. So like one of the Danger Club could fight that one-on-one, and it just gives you the image of just wading. You imagine, Fulton's just wading through with his axe, just sending enemies flying in all directions, and just taking hits as he goes through it.
Sounds pretty cool, and quick, dirty, and unfulfilling is pretty much me to a T. So we do have a question as well. That's I think a very good one from Greg. Does their damage go down as you reduce the troop, or would you have to keep track of that?
I believe the damage doesn't go down, but what does go down is as you get through the thresholds, the threshold becomes their maximum hit points. So if they start at 90 hit points and they've got a threshold at 60, once you knock them through 60, they can't be healed back to 90. So that gives you the idea that maybe you've got maybe they've got a cleric behind them that is healing the injured warriors and keeping them in the fight. But once you've got through a certain one, you've killed enough of them that the cleric can't bring those people back.
Yes, and I suppose the mechanic is that, let's say, for instance, these Hell Knights, they do 2d6 slashing damage. Now, of course, if you were fighting it, let's say Fulton versus the Hell Knights, not all of them would be able to do the slashing attack against Fulton, so only enough of them, 2d6 worth, which isn't a huge amount of damage, would be close enough to the character to do that attack. And I suppose that's how they kind of get around that.
Well, yeah, cool. It's because you only take, if you're in melee with a troop, you only take one attack's worth of damage from them.
Yes.
But they don't need to roll to hit, is the idea of it. Like, there's enough of them. It's a reflex save rather than them having to beat your AC. So it's the idea that with enough people attacking, then they get through your armor. But obviously, as you reduce the size of it, there's fewer of them that can get into melee with party members, and you can pull back and use range and things like that.
Very cool.
I really like it.
I think it's definitely well worth having it there as a campaign. I'm surprised it's taken so long to get rules for that kind of thing. So very glad to see them.
Yeah.
Let's push on, because the time is a ticking, and we've got a few other things to go, including. What is that? It's a little clay doll thing. I mean, This is peak Dan right here. You do love your twee little things. What is that gardening toy?
That is a kami. So that is a.
Why has he got Japanese... a trowel?
It's a little nature spirit. Isn't he lovely?
I mean, he is lovely. But I mean,
so there's one after. There's some after it. So they're from Tian-Xia, and that's to give you an idea of one of the main flavor focuses. If there is a focus to this bestiary, one of the themes of it is Tian-Xia. We're getting a lot of things inspired by Asian mythology, and that would fit in that world. That makes sense for a couple of reasons. Partly because Fists of the Ruby Phoenix is coming out later this year. It's the next adventure path that is set in Tian-Xia, so lots of extra monsters to populate your adventures there. Also because Paizo have, in the last year, massively expanded the number of freelancers that they are using to write things for them. They did a big call out last year for new creators with very little experience required, but with a special focus on saying we want writers from other cultures, we want writers from other life experiences and underrepresented groups, and we want to put those in. And if you look at the author list for the Bestiary, it is enormous. There are loads and loads of authors, so they've brought in a lot of new voices, and they're getting those voices to write things to do with their own culture, and so we get things like this. We get the kami, who are like nature, they're little nature spirits. So I guess similar to the Leshy, or similar sort of dryads, but very thematic to Tian-Xia and to that kind of world. They're also very Studio Ghibli, and if you look at the Kodama in the next one, they are very They're like little guys with.
There's the Kodama, little creepy stone baby.
Aren't they great? So, if you now want to take your Leshy to... everything's got little faces in this. We haven't got a picture on there, but even the Will of the Wisp have got tiny little faces on them, and they're adorable. So if you want to be cute and you want to play your Studio Ghibli adventure, you can absolutely do that. Which is,
cute. If that was lumbering around in my garden, I think a bit of wee would come out. I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty terrifying. But,
the other thing that the other thing we're going to get in this is Imperial dragons, but don't worry, we'll give them. Dragons deserve their own section because they're dragons.
Yes, exactly. So there's some cute little sort of Asian flavored spirits. We're moving on to this creature, a flumph. Now, first of all, I thought this was going to be a character based upon the early 80s UK TV programme for children, The Flumps, which was a classic, a very specific callback. Maybe, I think probably only Paul might know that reference in the chat, but maybe some others you will. Doo-doo, doo-doo. The old good old flumps. But this is not. This is a flumph who looks a tiny bit of the face like Jar Jar Binks.
I know. Right. So this would be one of the other themes of this book is that there's some returning old favourites, I guess. Bestiary 1 was all about how many classic monsters can we put out as soon as possible so you can get your games up and running.
Yeah.
Bestiary 2 was kind of, a lot of it was fleshing out those ones and a lot of extra options for the kind of monsters that were already there in Bestiary 1. This one is a lot more out there, but it's also taking time to go back and find some kind of some monsters that have been used before, but haven't yet found their way back into the game.
A little bit left field.
Yeah, exactly. And the Flumph is one of these ones. The Flumph was a famously rubbish monster in first edition, to the point there was a whole book called Classic Monsters Redeemed, where they rewrote a bunch of rubbish monsters to make them a bit better. And the Flumph was one of those. I think it's adorable. So it's an aberration, but it's a lovely aberration. There aren't many of those. Most of them are big monstery evil things. It's like a big jellyfish that wanders around in its tentacles. It doesn't understand the concept of lying. It trusts everybody. And if you knock it prone, it falls on its head and it can't stand up again because its little tentacles just wave around in the air.
Bless its heart.
I know, right?
Yeah, I did quite like even its description. It says, it's pretty out there, but it's actually really friendly and likes to battle the forces of dark cosmic horror, which is quite cute.
I love that, because when we're talking about the forces of dark cosmic horror in your role-playing games, we're talking Cthulhu. We're talking that level of, and this is what you get on the side of good to help you out, which I think's lovely.
A flumph. Very cute.
Speaking of the forces of dark horror, the other classic monster that I think we would be happy to have is Krampus.
Krampus, yes. Now you got a little sneak preview of Krampus. Now, isn't that the Scandinavian version of sort of anti-Santa?
Yes. So
right.
Krampus descends on. I think he's from Nidal, and it descends. Or it might be Irisant, and it descends on this one poor cursed village every year to terrorize it, and it will judge the children who are naughty, and then it will carry them off in its bag. Presumably to eat.
Why would you live there?
It is the absolute baddest of Santas. So if you want to run a Christmas-themed game, you can do that. It's got some great things. It can designate a member of the party to be naughty, which it gets a load of bonuses against its naughty target, and it can see its naughty target wherever it runs, so you can't escape it once you're on the naughty list.
Wow.
It also, once he puts you in his basket, you turn into a child.
Oh, God.
It de-ages you.
Jesus.
So you're a child who has to fight Krampus, and just in case that doesn't make it any more scary, he's also a level 21 monster. So if you do want to have your Christmas special, you do need to be the highest level you can be in the game in order to fight Santa.
Right. Okay. So good Lord above. Let's hope that Krampus never comes anywhere near anyone's campaign because he sounds
frightening.
Horrific.
I know. I love it.
Good. What's he carrying on his shoulder? What is that sort of basket?
That's his basket. That's his basket in which he puts the bad children,
right?
Or bad adventurers who then become bad children,
and they get eaten. It's a classic tale, and there we go. You can actually star in your own version of the Krampus Christmas horror, which would inevitably end in a TPK if you decide you're all naughty. Very good. So we've got Krampus there, liking Krampus. Let's see who we got next. We've got an ancient sovereign dragon. I mean, that is pretty cool looking. Very Asian styled. You've got that sort of, sort of classic long body.
It's one of the things that you always get in a bestiary is like, well, what dragons are we getting? Because you always get a section of dragons in it. And this time it's time for the Imperial dragons, which it was about time for. I think we've had all of the most of the regular types of dragons. So now we're getting the Imperial dragons, who are from they're from Tian-Xia. They're much more of a Chinese dragon kind of flavor in terms of their design, and they're based on sort of environments. You've got the sovereign one, but then you've got a sea dragon, you've got a forest dragon. That's the kind of vibe that you're looking at with those. They have a constrict attack, of course, because they're windy and long, which is nice to see. That's a nice new mechanic to get in there. And just in terms of flavor, so Imperial dragons they're much more connected to human affairs or to mortal affairs than their inner sea counterparts. So you will see them kind of leading nations and things like that, and being much more kind of connected to the world. Whereas the ones in the inner sea, other than Hermea and what's his name, Jimmy Eugenics dragon down there, who's creating his perfect society, they tend not to be quite so directly involved in mortal affairs. So a nice idea. I like the idea. You can go to a kingdom and their king is a dragon.
That's pretty
fun.
cool.
Nice one to play with. So that's the dragons you're going to get in there. There's a nice little set of them, and just like all your other dragons, you're going to get a couple of different age variants that you can play with to change them up, and some general universal rules to put in there.
And there we go. Yes, Greg has commented. Jimmy Eugenics Dragon is now official Danger Club canon. You heard it here first. That famous ancient dragon, Jimmy Eugenics, who also has a show on Tuesday evenings on NBC. So make sure you catch him on there, going live to every home in America. Now, moving on to a dragon you would not want at every home in America. This is a worm wraith.
Yeah.
I mean, that is pretty sick.
It is. So I just wanted to add a couple of these in. They're not in the dragon section. They're in their own little bits, but they're not the only dragons that you get in the game. You don't just get your Imperial dragons in this book. You're also getting a zombie dragon, which is nice and a bit lower level as well. So it's always nice to have dragons you can fight at slightly lower level. The worm wraith. The worm wraith is a dragon that refused to die. Wow. A dragon that refused to accept its own death, which is metal.
That is metal. And it always puzzled me about sort of zombie dragons being sort of really high stats, because you're like, it's effectively a dead version of its live counterpart. That should be a little bit weaker, surely. But hey, I'm glad they've addressed that. But this worm wraith that's pretty badass.
Let's have a look. So zombie dragon, creature level 9. So
wow.
That is not. It's mid-level, but it's It's something you can throw at your party a bit early, because I like to fight a dragon in a campaign at some point, and I always want to fight a dragon a bit early, and it always ends up being like, oh, okay, well, it's actually going to be it'll be a young white dragon, but we'll just pretend it's a bit bigger so that we can kind of get it in there. But it's nice to have slightly lower level things, because we're playing a fantasy role-playing game. We want to kill a dragon, man.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of befriending dragons these days. But let's see if you wanted to befriend that dragon. I don't think anyone's that mad enough.
No, he's a bad dragon.
What kind of things, just briefly, could we expect from this? I can see spectral claws. I can see divine spell casting and stuff. I mean, is it...
Yeah, this is there's the zombie dragon, which we haven't got a picture of, is like you say, it's a reanimated corpse of a dragon, so it's not quite so clever. This thing, it's a full on. It's level 17. It's I think it's incorporeal. So there's all your joy with fighting ghosts, that's in there, but it also has all the stuff that comes with a dragon, so it can breathe horrible probably it's going to be negative energy, isn't it? It breathes negative energy.
It is a negative energy, and I can tell you now that it's breath weapon, a burst of negative energy that deals, I believe that's 18d6 negative damage to all creatures in a 60-foot cone. 18d6, holy moly. And I do like the fact that it's got a 6th level spell called Vampiric Exsanguation.
Oh, gosh.
But it doesn't explain what that is, but I'm sure it's absolutely horrific. So you've got something really, this could be a big boss of your campaign.
This could be campaign ending.
And some wonderful descriptions you could do of that on there. It's
so many great kind of go things. And if you want to go even more extreme, there's a level 23 version if you want the Elder Worm Wraith. They'll give you stats for an even more powerful one as well. So
Wow.
go crazy. But they're frightening, but I just think the art's really great.
Oh, the art's great, and it's also nice to see in a bestiary, as well as some fun, fluffy stuff. You got some, some big bosses.
They're nice, and one thing that should be said about this book in general is that there's a very nice level spread to it. Generally, what happens is as you get further through bestiaries, they tend to favour higher level stuff more often because they want things that are more mechanically complex, which means more rules, which means more abilities, which means more powerful. That happened a lot especially with first edition, where things were kind of ground up built, so things as you got more complicated they got higher level. That's not necessarily true in second edition, so it means you can kind of spread things a bit more. But there's a really nice, there's lots of level 1s and 2s and things in here, as well as the level 23s and craziness. So this is a functional book for your whole campaign. It's not just for your high level stuff.
That's really cool. And yeah, speaking of really cool stuff, I moved on the page and I just left it there because, to be honest, seems to be something that's maybe new to this book, but we've got some clockwork business going on. A very cool kind of clockwork character there. Can you tell us a bit more about the clockwork?
So I left the clockworks towards the end because they were on the cover, so they're one of the big features of this. Clockworks they're mechanical constructs, so they're things that have been built. And they're quite fun. So they have a key. All of them have a key because they're clockwork. They have to be wound before they can be used. It usually takes a minute. It does say that they vary, depending on the size of them, they can vary from a small key that must be wound up to like a key that requires multiple people to turn. Like it's a whole thing to power up these things, or machines to power them up.
Yeah.
They range from the Clockwork Spy. We've got stats for the Clockwork Spy that you used to have in the Danger Club. That's in the game now.
Yeah, the old, what's his face? Beringer?
Yeah.
No, somebody give us.
I'm not sure you technically ever sold it, so you may well be that it's still there in the bottom of the bag of holding somewhere.
Yeah, I think Velda's still got it in his bag because it was quite useful, and we fixed it, but we never used it. This guy's a Clockwork Mage, so obviously these things have also got magical. Do they require magic to run, or are they purely mechanical?
So it's all basically built on wands. It's a bunch of wands cobbled together with tech to build this robot that can use magic, which is just great. And you can harvest it for magical equipment afterwards because it's built on magical items, which I think is really interesting. The ones that you get in the book are the spy, the soldier, the mage, and the dragon that we will come to.
Yes. Shall I move on to the dragon?
Yeah, let's have a look at the dragon.
Let's have a look at the dragon, because he's actually, those sort of bright-eyed among you would have seen that he's on the cover. It's a slightly different version, but so they're obviously advertising the Clockwork feature. Tell us about this dragon.
That's the Clockwork Dragon. That's the star of this thing. So it's got a bunch of things you would expect from a dragon in terms of attacks, breath attacks, things like that. If you look on, it's got a its winding value. I can't remember exactly called it, something like that. That's how long it can stay functional for. So the dragon, once it's wound, is effective for that's awake for a whole week that they can fight. And a thing that they can do, that Clockworks can do, if you're worried about sort of saying, oh, well, how do I get them in my campaign if they only work for a day, is they go into standby mode. So a Clockwork can enter standby mode. It's aware of its surroundings, but its clock can't act, and its clock doesn't go down, basically. So you can have your dungeon of a bunch of Clockwork warriors that were all wound and then went into standby mode and are just waiting for the hapless adventurer to walk in and trigger them, and that's how they activate. But yeah, you're going to get all of your Clockwork Dragon. It can breathe fire. It's got its Draconic Frenzy, like all dragons do, where it gets a bunch of attacks all at once. It can spear you with its tail. It's a good old beastie, and it's a level 16, so it's reasonable. It's powerful, but not impossible that you can get one of these in. And I love the art of that. I love the kind of the very Da Vinci style wings with that kind of canvas stretched across them.
Yes.
I think that's just a really, really nice idea. And as we're going into a lot of the techier stuff, as we get guns and gears towards the end of this year, and we start playing around with gunslingers and inventors and things like that, I think we're going to get some really fun clockwork based adventures. I also like, because I like robots, but I don't necessarily always like golems. Because golems are a very specific thing, and they've got very specific immunities, which can make them frustrating to fight. You don't need me to tell you this, James.
Yes. Well, a stone golem is effectively immune to pretty much everything.
Golems in general golems have magic immunity.
Yes.
They're immune to most magic, which is interesting for that specific monster. But sometimes you just want a big robot that you can blast with spells while it tries to shoot you with things. And this is something that fills that for me. I like the idea of fighting a bunch of robots, and I hope we get more of them, because 4 of them is fun. But this strikes me as an area that could just grow and grow.
It does, yeah, exactly. And also, for me, it opens up some interesting storytelling angles, because when I see a clockwork dragon, I think, well, that's been made by somebody. So you immediately have the opportunity that, let's say, a city might have its own clockwork dragon. So they could be attacked by bandits, and early in the campaign, you see them roll out this clockwork dragon, and you get the clockwork dragon attacking the bandits and ripping them limb from limb, and you're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And then later in the campaign, you have to go back and fight that city, and you've seen it. You've already got the sort of the tease earlier in the campaign. And it's perfectly reasonable. Whereas having a dragon in a cupboard, you're not going to have a dragon in a cupboard. You just don't have that. So I think it's really cool. It opens up some interesting storytelling arcs.
There's instant storytelling with it as well, because things like the fact it has to be wound by several people for a minute in order to work. So there's an encounter immediately for your low-level party is hold off the enemy while we wind the dragon. And they're just great. And put that with the troop rules, hold the line against the zombie horde until the dragon can come up and slay them.
Yeah,
Lovely.
or trying to stop people from winding the dragon. So you keep attacking people on the back of this clockwork dragon and try and stop them turning the key, and that's the plot. Great, absolutely great. Really, really enjoy it. And the artwork is superb. So lots of interesting stuff there. And of course, Gwot makes the point that it's time to run a horror game based on Return to Oz. I mean, it wouldn't be anything else. That is the most horrific kids film ever made. I know it has won that plaudit, but that is a horrific film. And of course, we're talking about TikTok, aren't we? The Sergeant robot.
There's rules for monkey swarms in this as well.
TikTok, oh God, monkey swarms. Who actually apparently it was Peter Duncan in there, of Blue Peter fame.
Really?
Yeah, being the legs. He used to walk around as I think it was TikTok, wasn't it? Or whatever his name was. Now we're moving on from the mighty to the mighty silly. We've got a tooth fairy here. And he did say we'd talk about the tooth fairies.
Yep.
Go on then. Tell us about the tooth fairies.
I put the tooth fairies into this review because they're on the cover, and because some of the Dangerlings asked on Discord. They were like, "Can you talk about the tooth fairy?" So I thought it was only fair to put them in here. Tooth fairies, they are tiny fae that fly around, and they want your teeth. And individually, they are really, really weak. There's stats so you can fight an individual tooth fairy. It comes armed with a pair of pliers, and it will try and fly in your mouth, and it will try and pull your teeth out of your mouth. It has 2 spells, which are both frightening for this. It has sleep, which you don't want a tooth fairy to do on you. And it has mage hand, so it can, I guess, carry away your tooth with its mind. If it gets hold of your tooth, it will start tugging on your tooth and cause bleed damage. That sucks and is a bit of a grim vision. But they've got AC 15, 8 hit points. You're not going to get too troubled by that. However, a tooth fairy swarm, which there is also stats for, is quite nasty, and they just fly onto your space, and then they've got a 3-action attack called Pry, where they try and pull your teeth out. And if you fail your save, the tooth fairies just start pulling out your teeth, which means you take damage, you take bleed damage, and if you are a spellcaster, you have to start making checks in order to be able to cast your spells, because suddenly it's really hard to talk.
Oh, God. That is horrific.
It's so gross. It's, That's really the only reason. That's kind of, I guess, there's our final thing. Is some of the stuff in this book is really weird. There's lots of really weird. It's the fun. If it is the final book, it's where they're having the most fun with it. So there's strange stuff in that. So if you want to start pulling your players' teeth out, which that would send a shiver right through me. That would. I'd be really uncomfortable.
It's just a horrible image, isn't it? And well, hopefully you haven't found this review much like pulling teeth. We've really enjoyed it. And the sort of conclusion, Dan. So obviously this is the more left field. This is the slightly different. We're looking at sort of more flavorful sort of monsters in here. Would you recommend this as a purchase? And who would you recommend this as a purchase to?
It's hard to say because I would say this is the most left field of the bestiaries.
Yes.
To give you an idea, we should say it's if you're buying it from Paizo, you probably will find it cheaper from other suppliers, but you're looking at $50 if you want the hard copy version, or $14.99 if you want the PDF. So it's not cheap. It is probably the most situational of all of the bestiaries. As a result, it's probably the least essential out of all of them. But there are a few things. If you are going to be doing campaigns in Tian-Xia, I would say you probably want this book because you're going to find populating your world much, much easier if you have this book. If you want to play around with a lot of the new ancestries from the Ancestry Guide, if you want evil versions of those and you don't want to have to homebrew it, they're all in here. You're going to find all of your all of your Azarketi and stuff like that in that book, and the Kitsune.
Yes.
There is a shirtless Kitsune in here who I can tell you I feel like I have met at some conventions before. But yeah, it's its own thing. It is, if this is going to be a trilogy of bestiaries and you've already bought the first two, I can see how it is going to be tempting. It's going to be difficult not to buy this third one. I would be struggling with having that gap on my shelf. I'm missing. Out of first edition, I have bestiaries 1, 2, and 4, and I can tell you that hurts. So, if you want to complete the set, then I can see how you would want to complete the set. Bear in mind, a lot of these monsters will go on to Archives of Nethys. So if all you're looking for is to get the stat blocks, you're going to be able to get them on there. Would I recommend it versus, say, spending that money on a Lost Omens book? Bear in mind, Lost Omens Moangi Expanse is only a couple of months away and is probably going to be really, really good. If you are on a limited budget, there is probably more Galarian lore that you can get from the Lost Omens line. Or from kind of some of the things like Secrets of Magic that's coming out. But if you are a GM and you want to have your complete toolbox here and you like that thing of flipping through it, it is a really good book and it's much more functional than some of the first edition bestiaries were. You're going to find stuff for all levels in here and some really interesting creatures as well.
Well, there we go. A good roundup. So, I mean, it's certainly a beautiful looking book, as we've come to expect from all these Pathfinder books. So I'm going to sit back here. So that has been the Pathfinder Bestiary 3. It will be available when, Dan?
It's available today.
Today. So if you want to spend $50 on the hardback version or $15 on the PDF, it is available today. Get your mitts upon it. I mean, as usual with the sort of Pathfinder books, I'm sure that they will be beautifully presented as they always are.
It's a nice book. It doesn't have the thing that we talked about with the Ancestry Guide, where it's got loads of double page spreads, where you definitely want the print version to be able to appreciate those. A PDF will do you quite nicely. On this.
Yeah, and actually linking to something we spoke about some Dangerous Wednesdays ago, perhaps if you're doing more gaming online, you could start with the PDF version and then, who knows, in the future maybe upgrade to the hardback if you wish. Certainly, it's got the accessibility aspect of it. And it's tricky, isn't it? Because things like this, they used to assist rather than sort of be a core. Just want to be like you say, I want to populate my world. I want to get some cool encounters, or, I need someone to do a bit of this or that, something else. Look up the Bestiary. But,
a nice way of getting it is if you are I shouldn't say this as a GM, but if you are a player and you're in a group with 4 of you, $50 split 4 ways is not very much to buy a copy for your GM to help them to add more monsters to the game. So that might be a way of getting it into there.
Yeah, it's true. And Gwot says, no centerfold foldouts? Well, I think that would probably be the shirtless Kitsune if there was ever going to be a centerfold shirt.
Just
pull
a
out.
peck on each.
Yeah, just doing lying on a rug.
Well,
I would buy
that's
that.
worth saying is actually they've stuck quite closely to what they've done in some of the other second edition books, where most of the entries take up only a single page. They're trying to keep it brief, trying to keep it. The more complicated ones, like Krampus, is 2 pages. So there are a few there where having the 2 pages maybe is nice to see everything all together. But most of the monsters are only 1 page.
Yeah. So there we go. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on Dangerous Wednesdays. As ever, it's been lovely having you all.
Borash comes wandering over.
Oh, he's still alive.
Borash is never eaten by creatures. He is too mighty by this. I see that Borash has done well to hire all of you as his guards. You have done very well this day.
Where were you? Were you just hiding behind the cart or something?
No, Borash was hiding behind that camel. And he points at the camel nods.
Ah, good. I'm glad you did.
Yes, do not worry, Borash is safe, which is more than I can say for Tim. He gestures to the person who's in 2 pieces. But that is not a problem, for Tim did not pay very well for his protection. And so if anyone were to be eaten, I would hope that it would be either Tim or Sandra over there. And he gestures to one of the other merchants, who just suddenly looks like, sorry, what?
You are a very trying man.